determined in the coming weeks to rid this country of a racist, xenophobic, anti-poor, anti-sick and disabled, and fundamentally vicious government. Douglas was speaking in the context of anti-slavery, but of course he made his point deliberately generalizable because he understood very profoundly that tyranny and oppression Tyranny and oppression acts across a variety of domains, extracting and burdening, dividing and ruling. Anti-racism is indivisible. It is vital, therefore, that we see the linkages between the oppression of people of color and the oppression of so many others: women, sexual dissidents, the poor, the unemployed, the homeless, the disabled, and religious minorities, and that we join forces across a range of issues and conflicts. Anti-racism is often presented as special pleading, a special interest, or at best a matter of inclusivity, benevolently allowing Black and Asian people a place at the diversity table. In fact, anti-racism concerns us all because apart from anything else, we are up against the edifice of ideological neoliberalism, which, like the capitalism that undergirds it, relies on race and racism to operate and thrive. It was founded, as too many people don't like to remember, on the forcibly extracted, unremunerated labor of Black people, which may have been eventually abolished, but the dynamic of extracting labor widely for poor compensation and concentrating the profits in a few hands has not. It flourishes nourished by ongoing gendered race and international divisions, which it attempts to mask by high-minded talk of inclusivity and shared prosperity. In this scheme, such things as ethnic and gender pay gaps are not unfortunate and incidental, but constitutive of the workings of a system that is not only fundamentally exploitative, but requires us to exist in atomized constituencies, pitting our causes against each other. We have to see through this, remind ourselves to see through this anew every day, and join forces. What does this mean for us as union members and as students in solidarity with the strike? First of all, we have to reject, as we have, not only pay gaps and pension detriments, which we know to affect women and ethnic minorities and the disabled and the unwell disproportionately, but also that we refuse to act as border guards. We are teachers, not guards, and our understanding of teaching and learning is that the production and fostering of knowledge is fundamentally global in scope and always has been. Knowledge cannot accept segregation, line drawing, seclusion, separation, and surveillance. We do not accept the hostile environment. Knowledge cannot flourish in a hostile environment. This environment has seen not just some of our best researchers and colleagues isolated and targeted, but made life incredibly difficult for those who are here on work permits and student visas, denying them that most fundamental of rights, the right to protest and assert critical dissent. When our union and our pickets are denied the presence of so many fellow university members, we are directly affected by the hostile environment. We are also affected by the racist workings of Prevent, when students and colleagues, particularly our Muslim students and colleagues, are profiled as susceptible to extremism, and when our seminars and lectures are subjected to extremism assessments, while at the same time we fund precious JRFs for people writing quasi-philosophical and pseudo-intellectual apologetics for the most discredited forms of racial science. The university cannot and must not foster the kind of pseudoscience that not even 100 years ago was legitimating and sanctioning the oppression, murder, and cleansing of millions of our fellow human beings. I want to say here, because self-reflexivity and self-critique is vital to all progressive causes, that we must also pay attention to the ways in which union movements have not themselves been immune to the virus of racism or to the instrumentalizing of xenophobia. We must stand vigilant against the weaponizing of migrants as explanation for austerity and immiseration, and the ways in which migrants and immigration have been turned into alibis, not just by mainstream politicians, but shamefully some high-profile union leaders with considerable political clout. Commit to anti-racism is to recall that there is no place for racism or xenophobia, the playing of race against class or migrants against the so-called traditional working classes in the labor movement. We must stand alongside climate justice movements and the deeply committed efforts here to bring the university to divest from fossil fuels. Not least because given the history of both capitalism and colonialism, the consequences of catastrophic changes in climate have already affected the global south disproportionately. We must acknowledge the leadership of indigenous peoples and campaigns in the global south in bringing us to greater awareness of ecological destruction and the need to act against it now. We must also put pressure on universities to end collaborations with the arms industry. This too is an industry premised on racism and genocide, as we can see from the fact that British arms industry is complicit today in raining death down upon thousands and thousands of Yemenis. The university cannot and must not be handmaiden to death and ethnic cleansing, not in our name. Those of us who are campaigners for anti-racism and decolonization, particularly those of us not only from BME backgrounds, need to be attentive to the toxic emergence of racial hatred and chauvinism in our own communities. Today, a deeply vicious Islamophobic Hindu majoritarian, the Bollywood director Vivek Agnihotri, had been scheduled to speak on graduate union premises, invited there by someone who is also the graduate union vice president. Shame. We must be alert to the sly subterfuges of those who would use decolonization and anti-racism to Trojan horse ideologies that are as vicious, lethal, and unacceptable as white supremacy. Racism cannot be fought by racism. Chauvinism cannot be defeated by majoritarianism. We are all part of racial and supremacist structures. We are all obliged to dismantle them, all of them. You cannot point to racism elsewhere without paying attention to it directly, at the same time to its manifestations within yourself. Yes, Tory party, I am looking directly at you. In closing, I want to pay tribute to all of you who have kept the flame of protest alive, all of you who understand so profoundly that critical thinking and justified resistance are the key not only to academic endeavor, but to human existence itself. And you have done so in the face of scoffing, sneering, and marginalizing at the hands of those who will enjoy the rights that have been won over the years through hard effort, but are doing very little to protect them. I am going to end with Frederick Douglass again. Let me give you a word on the philosophy of reform. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. The conflict has been exciting, agitating, all-absorbing, and for the time being, putting all other tumults to silence. Those who would profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and never will. Thank you.